Welcome to Immortal Stories, where every story is a stab at the truth, and every fate hides a pain that no one dares to tell. If you feel your heart just ached, subscribe to the channel. Every support of yours is the motivation for us to continue telling stories that touch the deepest emotions. The wedding day revelation, a twisted fate. The air was thick with the scent of lilies and anticipation, a fragile veil over a secret so dark it threatened to swallow the very light of the summer's day. Sarah, radiant in her lace gown, stood at the altar, her heart aflutter with the joyous tremor of a dream finally realized. Beside her, Michael, her fiancé, beamed, his eyes filled with love that seemed to promise an eternity of happiness. Their story was the stuff of fairy tales, or so everyone believed. Childhood sweethearts, enduring challenges, and finally, this glorious culmination. The village, quaint and close-knit, had watched their love blossom, a testament to enduring affection in a world often too cynical. But beneath the veneer of perfect love, a shadow stretched, growing longer with each passing moment, ready to engulf them all. Who would have thought that a man, seemingly so devoted to his family, a pillar of the community, harbored a truth so horrifying it would shatter not just one life, but an entire lineage? The hushed whispers of the congregation, the soft rustle of silk, all seemed to conspire, holding their breath for the inevitable explosion. This was to be the happiest day of Sarah's life, a day etched in memory as the beginning of a beautiful journey. Yet, standing there, bathed in the stained glass glow, a cold tremor snaked its way up her spine, a premonition of the storm gathering on the horizon. Michael, a kind and steady man, had always been Sarah's rock. Their love, nurtured through years of shared laughter and quiet understanding, was the envy of many. They'd navigated the complexities of young adulthood, the trials of building careers, and the subtle pressures of family expectations, always emerging stronger, more intertwined. Sarah had always felt an unspoken comfort in Michael's presence, a sense of belonging that transcended mere affection. He was her anchor, her safe harbor in a world that often felt unpredictable. Yet, as the minister's voice resonated through the sun-drenched church, speaking of vows and eternal commitment, an unbidden thought pricked at the edges of her consciousness, a fleeting, almost imperceptible sense of unease. It was like a faint, discordant note in a beautiful melody, easily dismissed, yet persistently there. The main character in this unfolding tragedy, Sarah, was an ordinary girl, perhaps a little too trusting, a little too innocent, a victim of a cruel fate she was utterly unprepared for. Her life, until this very moment, had been a tapestry woven with threads of simple joys and predictable patterns. She believed in the inherent goodness of people, in the purity of love, in the sanctity of family, and it was this very belief that would make the coming revelation all the more devastating. The story of Michael's family was equally unassuming on the surface. His father, Arthur, was a respected elder in the community, a widower who had raised Michael with a firm but loving hand. Arthur had always been kind to Sarah, treating her with the warmth of a daughter he never had. Their relationship was built on mutual respect and affection, a comforting presence in Sarah's life, especially after her own parents had passed years ago. There was an ease, a comfortable familiarity that made her feel truly part of their family even before the wedding. Michael's mother had died when he was young, leaving Arthur to raise him alone, forging a bond between father and son that seemed unbreakable. Everyone admired Arthur's dedication, his quiet strength, his unwavering commitment to his son. No one, absolutely no one, could conceive of the dark secret that festered beneath this veneer of respectability. The events leading to this tragic climax had been unfolding for months, perhaps even years, in the shadows, hidden from plain sight. A gradual erosion of trust, an insidious creeping of darkness, disguised by the everyday rituals of life. It was a secret born of desperation, shielded by deceit and nurtured by a shocking perversion that would ultimately unravel everything. The tension in the air, once subtle, now felt palpable, pressing down on Sarah like an invisible weight. Her smile, once effortless, now felt a little strained at the edges. She tried to shake off the nagging feeling, attributing it to pre-wedding jitters, a common affliction for any bride. But deep down, a primal fear stirred, a warning sign she couldn't quite decipher. It was a premonition of something monumental, something that would irrevocably alter the course of her life. Just a DNA test, if only it had been conducted earlier, would have made everything fall apart then, perhaps saving countless tears. Or perhaps it was always meant to be revealed on this day, at this very altar, for maximum impact, for the most shattering of revelations. The stage was set, the unwitting actors in place, and the curtain was about to rise on a drama more horrific than any fictional tale. This was not a story of love triumphant, but of love betrayed, of innocence shattered, and of a secret so profound it would leave an indelible scar on the lives of everyone it touched. The hushed reverence of the church was about to be replaced by gasps of horror, the joyous celebration by utter devastation. The tension in the air, once subtle, now felt palpable, pressing down on Sarah like an invisible weight. Her smile, once effortless, now felt a little strained at the edges. She tried to shake off the nagging feeling, attributing it to pre-wedding jitters, a common affliction for any bride. But deep down, a primal fear stirred, a warning sign she couldn't quite decipher. It was a premonition of something monumental, something that would irrevocably alter the course of her life. Just a DNA test, if only it had been conducted earlier, would have made everything fall apart then, perhaps saving countless tears. Or perhaps it was always meant to be revealed on this day, at this very altar, for maximum impact, for the most shattering of revelations. The stage was set, the unwitting actors in place, and the curtain was about to rise on a drama more horrific than any fictional tale. This was not a story of love triumphant, but of love betrayed, of innocence shattered, and of a secret so profound it would leave an indelible scar on the lives of everyone it touched. The hushed reverence of the church was about to be replaced by gasps of horror, the joyous celebration by utter devastation. The minister cleared his throat, his voice filling the sacred space. If anyone here knows of any reason why these two should not be joined in holy matrimony, speak now or forever hold your peace. The traditional words hung in the air, an ancient incantation, usually a formality, a moment of silence before the joyous pronouncement. But today, the silence was not benign. It was pregnant, heavy with unspoken truths, a looming storm. Sarah's gaze flickered to Michael, then to the smiling faces of the congregation, searching for any sign of discord, anything that might explain the icy grip around her heart. But everyone seemed oblivious, lost in the beauty of the moment, innocent to the impending catastrophe. The air thickened, a palpable dread settling over the assembled guests. A faint whisper, almost imperceptible at first, seemed to emanate from the back of the church, growing in intensity, cutting through the silence like a sharp blade. It was a sound that would soon transform into a desperate cry, a chilling accusation that would rip through the very fabric of Sarah's world. The moment had arrived, the crescendo of a twisted symphony, ready to unleash its horrifying final notes. A woman, cloaked in a dark, nondescript dress, emerged from the shadows at the rear of the church. Her face was pale, drawn, her eyes burning with a desperate, raw emotion that sent a shiver down Sarah's spine. She was a stranger, yet her presence resonated with an undeniable force, an ominous harbinger of doom. All eyes turned to her, a collective gasp rippling through the congregation. The minister faltered, his words dying on his lips. Michael, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, turned, his brow furrowed in confusion, then concern. But Sarah, her instincts screaming, felt a cold dread settle in her stomach. This wasn't a jest, not a misunderstanding. This was something far more sinister. The woman, her voice trembling at first, then gaining a terrifying strength, piercing the sacred silence, declared, "Stop this wedding. This marriage cannot happen." Her words hung in the air, echoing off the stained glass windows, each syllable a hammer blow to Sarah's fragile happiness. The joyous anticipation in the church evaporated, replaced by a stunned silence, a collective holding of breath as the unthinkable began to unfold. The woman took a hesitant step forward, then another, her gaze fixed on Michael, a gaze filled with a complex mixture of accusation, sorrow, and something akin to a desperate plea. Sarah looked from the woman to Michael, then back again, her mind racing, trying to grasp the meaning of this shocking interruption. Who was this woman? What right did she have to disrupt the most important day of their lives? But even as these questions swirled, a terrible certainty began to dawn on her, a cold dread that solidified into an undeniable truth. This wasn't a jilted lover or a disgruntled acquaintance. This was something far deeper, far more destructive. The woman's voice, now clearer, though still laced with pain, resonated through the stunned silence. "Michael," she began, her voice raw, "you cannot marry her. Not when you are already a father." The words, simple yet devastating, struck Sarah like a physical blow. Her breath caught in her throat, her carefully constructed world crumbling around her. A father? But they had no children, no past entanglements that he had ever spoken of. This was impossible, a cruel, elaborate lie. Yet the woman's eyes held a truth so profound, so agonizing that Sarah knew instinctively that this was no fabrication. Michael's face, moments ago radiant with happiness, had drained of all color. He swayed slightly as if struck, his eyes wide with mixture of shock and dawning horror. He stammered, What are you talking about? Who are you?" His voice was a strangled whisper, barely audible above the rising murmur of the crowd. The woman, her gaze still fixed on Michael, seemed to draw strength from his denial, from the palpable tension in the church. She held up a small, crinkled envelope, her hand trembling. "I am Maria," she announced, her voice now filled with a quiet, resolute fury. "And I carry your child, Michael." The words hung in the air, a poisonous cloud, suffocating the last vestiges of joy. Sarah felt the ground give way beneath her feet. Maria. The name was unfamiliar, yet it resonated with a terrifying finality. A child. His child. The revelation was a jagged shard of ice in her heart, shattering her dreams, tearing apart the beautiful tapestry of her future. The whispers among the congregation swelled into a cacophony of gasps and shocked exclamations. The impossible had become horrifyingly real. Then Maria turned her gaze from Michael to Arthur, Michael's father, a look of profound sorrow and desperate accusation etched on her face. Her voice, though still tinged with pain, now carried a new, chilling undertone, a note of bitter revelation. "And not just Michael," she said, her voice dropping to a low, guttural growl that sent shivers down Sarah's spine. Every eye in the church, including Sarah's own, swiveled to Arthur, who, moment ago, had been a picture of benevolent pride. Now his face was ashen, his eyes wide with mixture of fear and something unreadable, something deeply disturbing. Maria's words, though not yet fully formed, were already painting a terrifying picture, connecting that Sarah never knew existed. The dark secret, the one that had been lurking in the shadows, was now beginning to unfurl its horrifying truth, a truth that implicated not just Michael, but the very man Sarah had come to respect and trust as a father figure. The silence that followed was deafening, a vacuum before the inevitable explosion. Maria's eyes, filled with a raw, primal anguish, locked with Arthur's. "Arthur," she whispered, her voice barely audible, yet carrying an undeniable weight of accusation. The secret behind the locked door, The incestuous relationship between father-in-law and daughter-in-law, the words, when they finally came, were a gut punch, a sickening revelation that ripped through the sanctity of the church, shattering every illusion, every pretense of normalcy. Sarah gasped, a strangled sound escaping her throat. Her mind reeled, struggling to comprehend the horrifying implications of Maria's statement. Father-in-law and daughter-in-law, but Arthur was Michael's father, and Maria was carrying Michael's child. The pieces of the puzzle, sickening and grotesque, began to click into place, forming a picture so vile, so depraved, that Sarah felt her world tilt on its axis. The whispers in the church transformed into shocked murmurs, then outright gasps of horror. The air was thick with disbelief, with revulsion, with a dawning realization of a truth so unspeakable it defied imagination. The wedding, meant to be a celebration of love, had become a tribunal of unspeakable depravity, a public unveiling of a family's darkest, most twisted secret. Arthur stood frozen, a statue of horror and shame, his eyes fixed on Maria, a silent acknowledgment of the monstrous truth she had just unleashed upon the world. The day JFK died, or the moment one was drafted at 18, those were seismic shifts for some. But for Sarah, this was her personal apocalypse. When sex leads blindly, a stepmother's confession. When lust prevails, one night with a young man, a lifetime of repentance. Those were merely whispers of depravity, now screaming in her ears. The secret behind the locked door, the incestuous relationship between father-in-law and daughter-in-law. It was no longer a whispered rumor, but a damning declaration, laid bare before a stunned congregation. The shock waves of Maria's revelation rippled through the church. Each gasp, each stunned murmur, a fresh stab to Sarah's heart. Her gaze, wide with disbelief and a nascent horror, darted between Maria, Michael, and then finally settled on Arthur, the esteemed elder, the kind widower, the man who had always treated her with such paternal affection, now stood exposed, a figure of grotesque depravity. The blood drained from her face, leaving her ashen and trembling. It wasn't just Michael's infidelity that threatened to destroy her, but the unfathomable depth of the betrayal, the sheer, twisted nature of the secret Maria had just revealed. The words father-in-law and daughter-in-law echoed in her mind, a nightmarish refrain, each syllable a fresh wave of nausea. This wasn't merely a clandestine affair. It was an abomination, a violation of every sacred bond and societal norm. The vibrant colors of the stained glass windows, moments ago a testament to beauty and hope, now seemed to mock her, casting distorted, ominous shadows on the collapsing facade of her life. The one sweet scent of lilies transformed into the cloying odor of decay, of corruption. Michael, still pale and visibly shaken, finally found his voice, a strangled protest that died in his throat. "Maria, what are you saying? This is insane." His denial was weak, unconvincing, and his eyes, filled with a desperate terror, only confirmed the horrifying truth. Maria, however, remained resolute, her gaze unwavering as she confronted Arthur. "Insane, Michael?" she spat, her voice laced with bitter scorn that cut through the stunned silence. "Or is it insane to hide the truth? To let this beautiful woman marry into a family built on lies and in perversion?" Her voice cracked on the last word, laden with a pain that resonated deep within Sarah's own shattered heart. It was clear, terrifyingly clear, that Maria was not simply a jilted lover seeking revenge. Her anguish was too raw, too profound. She was a victim, just as Sarah was now becoming a victim, caught in a web of deceit spun by the very men they were supposed to trust. The congregation was a tableau of shock, whispers growing louder, faces contorted in disbelief and disgust. This was not a scene from a wedding. It was a scene from a nightmare, unfolding in broad daylight. Arthur, finally breaking his horrifying silence, took a shaky step forward, his voice a hoarse whisper. "Maria, please don't do this. Think of Michael. Think of the family." His plea was not one of innocence, but of desperation, a pathetic attempt to salvage some shred of his shattered dignity. But Maria was beyond reasoning, beyond pity. The dam had broken, and the torrent of truth could no longer be contained. "Think of the family?" she scoffed, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. "What family, Arthur? The one built on your depravity? The one where a father-in-law conceives a child with his own daughter-in-law?" The sheer audacity of her words, the stark, brutal truth they contained, hit Sarah like a physical blow. Daughter-in-law, pregnant, with father-in-law. The pieces, sickeningly, horrifically, clicked into place. Maria wasn't just accusing Arthur of an affair with Michael's wife. She was accusing him of a relationship with his own son's wife, his daughter-in-law. And, more chillingly, that she was that daughter-in-law. The realization sent a wave of nausea through Sarah, making her sway on her feet. The minister, a kind and gentle man, looked utterly distraught, his face a mask of horror. He stammered, This is a house of God, such accusations. But his words trailed off, lost in the rising din of the shocked crowd. Maria, however, was not deterred. Her voice, though raw with emotion, held a chilling clarity. "The truth needs to be spoken, even in a house of God," she cried, her eyes blazing with a fierce, desperate courage. "I was married to your other son, Arthur, Michael's brother, your daughter-in-law, and you took advantage of me and my grief after David's death." Her words were a torrent, a dam bursting, unleashing a flood of unspeakable horror. David, Michael's older brother, who had died tragically in an accident 2 years prior. Sarah remembered Maria, a quiet, grieving widow who had rarely been seen since David's funeral. She had seemed so fragile, so broken. And now, the true horror of her vulnerability, of Arthur's monstrous exploitation, was laid bare. The implications were staggering, soul-crushing. This wasn't merely an affair. This was incest, a betrayal of the deepest trust, an abuse of power, and a grotesque violation of a grieving woman. Sarah's vision blurred, the beautiful church transforming into a grotesque nightmare. She felt a cold, isolating despair descend upon her, a terrible understanding that the man she was about to marry was inextricably linked to this unspeakable depravity. Not only was he Maria's partner in concealing this horrifying truth, but his own father was the architect of this monstrous betrayal. The shock was so profound, so utterly devastating, that she could barely breathe. The weight of the truth pressed down on her, suffocating her. This wasn't just a secret. It was a festering wound at the heart of the family she was about to join, a wound that had festered and grown, now erupting in the most public and painful way imaginable. The scent of lilies, once a symbol of purity, now seemed to carry the stench of deceit and corruption, an unbearable irony. The wedding day, once the happiest day, had become the day her world, her entire future, imploded with a sickening, audible crunch. Arthur, his face a mask of utter despair and shame, finally slumped against the altar, his broad shoulders shaking with silent sobs. His silence was a damning confession, a tacit admission of the grotesque truth Maria had unveiled. Michael, witnessing his father's breakdown, his own world crumbling around him, looked from Maria to Arthur, then to Sarah, his eyes filled with a desperate, pleading agony. "Sarah," he whispered, his voice broken, I didn't know the full extent. I swear." But his words were lost, drowned out by the rising crescendo of horrified gasps and exclamations from the congregation. Sarah couldn't hear him, couldn't see him. All she could see was the image of Maria, a grieving widow, exploited and abused by the very man who should have offered her comfort and protection. And now, she was carrying a child born of this twisted, incestuous union. The horror of it all was overwhelming, suffocating. The once pristine white of her wedding dress now felt stained, sullied by the filth of this monstrous secret. The idyllic dream of her wedding day had shattered into a million irreparable pieces. The future she had envisioned, a life filled with love, laughter, and the quiet comfort of family, lay in ruins at her feet. The man she loved, the man she was about to pledge her life to, was inextricably tangled in a web of unspeakable depravity, a secret so dark it cast a pall over everything. The innocent joy of the morning had been replaced by a crushing weight of despair, a profound sense of betrayal that cut deeper than any physical wound. The sacred vows meant to bind two souls in eternal love were now hollow echoes, mocking the tragedy that had unfolded. The perfect love story, the envy of the village, had unraveled in the most spectacular and devastating way imaginable, revealing a dark, festering core of perversion and deceit. And as Sarah stood there, amidst the ruins of her shattered dreams, she knew, with an icy certainty, that her life would never be the same. The silence that followed Maria's final accusation was not an absence of sound, but a deafening roar of shattered expectations, of broken trust, of a future irrevocably tainted. It was the sound of a world ending, not with a bang, but with a horrifying whispered truth. The congregation, once a sea of smiling faces, was now a tableau of stunned silence, punctuated by hushed whispers and disbelieving gasps. Sarah felt the weight of their collective gaze, 1,000 eyes piercing through her, seeing not the radiant bride, but the unwitting victim of a grotesque drama. Her carefully constructed facade of happiness had crumbled, exposing the raw, bleeding wound beneath. Michael, still trying to stammer out explanations, reached for her hand, but she recoiled as if from a venomous snake. The touch that had once brought her comfort now filled her with revulsion. How could she have been so blind? How could she have loved a man who was complicit in such a monstrous secret? The question swirled in her mind, a chaotic maelstrom, offering no answers, only a deeper descent into despair. The air in the church, once fragrant with lilies, now seemed to carry the acrid smell of burnt dreams, of shattered illusions. Arthur, his face buried in his hands, was now openly weeping, his sobs echoing through the stunned silence. It was the sound of a man utterly broken, not by remorse, but by the public humiliation of his exposed depravity. Maria, her initial fury giving way to profound exhaustion, simply stood there, a ghostly figure in the chaos she had unleashed, her hand protectively cradling her still flat stomach. The weight of her revelation, the immense courage it must have taken, settled upon her, leaving her utterly spent. Sarah looked at her, truly looked at her, and saw not an enemy, but another victim, a woman whose life had been irrevocably scarred by the same dark secrets that were now tearing Sarah's own world apart. A strange, unexpected kinship bloomed between them, a silent understanding born of shared pain and shared betrayal. The minister, finding his voice amidst the stunned silence, finally managed to stammer, I think we need to adjourn." His voice was weak, his usual authoritative tone replaced by a bewildered fragility. The sacred ceremony, the joyous union, had been profaned beyond repair. The sanctity of the church had been violated, not by Maria's truth, but by the horrific lies it had exposed. The congregation, as if released from a spell, began to stir, a slow, hesitant movement toward the exits. Whispers, louder now, filled the air, a whirlwind of speculation, condemnation, and morbid fascination. The wedding was over, but the true tragedy, the unraveling of a family, had only just begun. Sarah, feeling a surge of unexpected strength, turned away from Michael, away from Arthur, away from the shattered dreams and the suffocating despair. Her gaze fixed on Maria, a silent acknowledgment of the truth she had borne, the painful burden she had carried alone. There was no joy, no celebration, only the bitter taste of ashes in her mouth. Her hand, once poised to accept the wedding ring, now simply hung limply at her side. The future she had meticulously planned, the life she had so eagerly anticipated, had vanished in a flash of horrifying truth. This was not a story of love triumphant, but of love utterly demolished, of innocence irrevocably lost, and of family's deepest, darkest secrets finally, brutally, brought into the light. The journey of her shattered heart had only just begun. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with pain and confusion, but one thing was undeniably clear. Nothing would ever be the same. The girl who had walked down the aisle, full of hope and naive dreams, was gone, replaced by a woman forged in a crucible of devastating betrayal.